substantial allegations of voting irregularities.
That's right. It all comes down as the Trump campaign and Republicans fight legal battles in the state of Pennsylvania and elsewhere, we believe. Jillian Turner is live in Washington, D.C. to give us the very latest. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Brian and Steve. So you are correct. The Attorney General has broken his silence now, really for the first time since Election Day. He has ordered the U.S. Attorney to investigate any allegations of voting irregularities that he deems are substantial. As you know, Election Day is now a week behind us, but some states are still tallying up votes after experiencing historic voter turnout. Now, let's take a look at what the Attorney General actually said in this memo. He directs that investigations should happen if there are clear and apparently credible allegations of irregularities that, if true, could potentially impact the outcome of a federal election in an individual state. Richard Pilger, who's a Department of Justice official who oversees investigations of voting crimes like these, reportedly just stepped down from his role immediately after this bar authorization was released. Now, the White House, meanwhile, is claiming that Democrats are welcoming fraud without providing any tangible evidence that this is going on. President Trump, for his part, has the state of Pennsylvania in his crosshairs. He has now tweeted, quote, "Pennsylvania prevented us from watching much of the ballot count. Unthinkable and illegal in this country." Now take a listen to Senator Lindsey Graham, who backed the president up.
We don't need their permission to look into these allegations. We owe it to those who voted for President Trump and the country at large to test this system. If we don't deal with voting by mail in 2020, we'll never win the White House again.
Now, the Pennsylvania Attorney General is pushing back hard on this. He himself tweeted, "Not breaking. The Trump campaign's latest filing is another attempt to throw out legal votes. My team and I were already prepared for this. Sleep tight. We'll protect the laws of our Commonwealth and the will of the people." Now, it's really not just Pennsylvania. The Trump campaign has now announced that they are deploying recount teams to the states of Georgia and Arizona as well, in addition to Pennsylvania. Brian and Steve.
All right, Jillian, thank you very much.
You bet.
So, it's interesting, as she just detailed, Mr. Barr said the Department of Justice could look into specific allegations of voter fraud. And according to the New York Times, it sounds like there are two particular things that they are looking into. They're looking into ineligible voters in Nevada. And you've heard about that. We told you about that Republican referral where 3,000 non-residents allegedly voted. They're looking into that. And also they're looking into that affidavit by the postal worker in Erie, Pennsylvania, who essentially submitted the affidavit. We've all taken a look at it. And what it says is he says that the U.S. Postal Service bosses there in Erie, Pennsylvania, concocted a plan on how to backdate the ballots, which would make them essentially legal, even though they were not legal. In both of those cases, however, Brian, there do not seem to be enough votes involved to actually overturn those states.
Yeah, I mean, you got thousands. You got to get over 10,000 everywhere. Even though they're whittling it down in Arizona, it seems pretty big. Now, they're going to recount in Georgia. We'll see. Wisconsin, we'll see. The other thing is, what about the arrogance of people saying the president can't get a recount or can't look into allegations? I mean, there's the same people like Hillary Clinton who called him illegitimate. Jerry Nadler didn't show up for his inaugural, called him illegitimate. Jimmy Carter said the president actually didn't win. So he actually did better this time than last time, and he came out on top, and they didn't want to acknowledge. Now when he challenges after getting a historic 72 million votes, they're saying, well, he has no right to look into it. The GOP is staying pretty much united outside Senator Collins and Senator Sass and saying, well, keeping our powder dry, not congratulating President-elect Biden if that is indeed the case, until we find out about this. Here's Senator Mitch McConnell.
Let's not have any lectures, no lectures about how the president should immediately, cheerfully accept preliminary election results from the same characters who just spent 4 years refusing to accept the validity of the last election and who insinuated that this one would be illegitimate too if they lost again. Only if they lost. The people who pushed this hysteria could not have more egg on their face than they do right now.
So I understand the transition, and we remember the delay in the transition with Al Gore, and it was 30-plus days, and it does put your back against the wall. I think one thing would be good if the GSA said, hey, listen, take your office space, President-elect Biden, if that is indeed the case. Go ahead, start ramping up. And if worse comes to worse and everything was illegitimate and there was a problem with the battleground states and President gets 4 more years, how could it hurt to have an American party start staffing up as if they're going to take over? This way, the country is not hurting. The tensions are down. People can honestly look at the battleground states without the pressure of saying, I need to get started on the preliminary work leading up to the inaugural, Steve.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a tradition where this normally happens, but these are not normal times, as we know. However, you know, a lot of people are making this political. They're saying the GSA administrator is a President Trump appointee, and this is political. Apparently, you know, the administration, GSA, just says stand by on all of that. It's interesting, going back to what we were talking about a moment ago with Bill Barr. You know, the DOJ and his spokespeople say specifically that this was not at the direction of the White House or Republicans or anybody else. What is curious, though, is that he did meet with Mitch McConnell yesterday afternoon. When asked, both sides were asked, what did you talk about? They both declined. But nonetheless, so the DOJ is looking into those specific allegations. Meanwhile, Joe Biden, you know, he's in Wilmington, Delaware, where he's been for months, and he made it clear we knew that he was going to have a little press availability, although the press showed up and he didn't answer any questions, to talk about his coronavirus advisory board. But he also took the chance to make it very clear where he's weighing in there. Those are the people who are on his advisory board right there. He made it very clear where he sees the election right now. Watch this.
This election is over. It's time to put aside the partisanship and the rhetoric that designed to demonize one another. It's time to end the politicization of basic, responsible public health steps like mask wearing and social distancing. We have to come together to heal the soul of this country so that we can effectively address this crisis as one country where hardworking Americans have each other's backs and we're united in our shared goal, defeating this virus.
He also at one point talked a little bit about how I'm not going to be the president until late in January, but if you wear a mask, thousands of people's lives could be saved. So please just wear a mask. And what they're suggesting is wear a mask anytime you are outside of your house. He also, his team was able to put together some of the things they were going to do on day one. And this particular list has been confirmed by Fox News. What he would like to do on day one, as is the tradition, incoming presidents are able to do stuff. And without the help of Congress, he's going to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. He's going to reinstate DACA, the Dreamers, rejoin the World Health Organization, and repeal President Trump's travel ban. This is something incoming presidents do every time, Brian. And he's already put his list out.
Yeah, he also wants to get back into the Iranian deal, and he's going to end America first right away. He does not want America first, evidently. He says America's only first, he said, right before the election in the coronavirus cases, when we make up 4% of the world's population, 20% of the cases. He brought that up. So it was brought up, too, if, you know, the words are great, and it was written by John Meacham, one of the best writers in the country, we found out, when on Saturday when President-elect Joe Biden, if that is indeed the case, made his speech to say, look, it looks like I'm going to be president. I want to bring everyone together. But it was brought up in the Washington Times by Cal Thomas. If you want to bring everyone together, a funny way of showing it, because here's what he said. For Democrats, healing and unity often means bowing to their policy wishes. It never seems to work in reverse. Biden says he wants to bring us together. On which issues would he be willing to compromise and find common ground with to win the approval of Democrats, their media acolytes? Republicans must lose elections and then forfeit their principles. Rick Santorum brought it up, too, brought up an interesting point, too, when he came out and said, if you actually want to bring people together, why would you start off with a series of executive orders, which are just basically you acting alone unilaterally? We'll have to see. And I think the only way that Joe Biden will necessarily have to work with Democrats, with Republicans, is if they were able to win those 2 Senate seats, or one of the 2 Senate seats, up for re-election on January 5th, because they both have to do a runoff. Because right now it looks like it's going to be 50-48 if Alaska comes in and North Carolina holds out with Tom Tillis. It'll be 50-48, and then you got 2 more up for grabs. And that is really what's going on in Georgia right now. There couldn't be any more action in Georgia, Steve, especially because the Attorney General, Republican, is being asked to resign by 2 Republican Senate candidates.
The Secretary of State is in that particular state, and because they're in charge of the elections. And so Kelly Loeffler, Senator, and Senator David Perdue are both saying, hey, that person has got to go. Brad Raffensperger is his name. He's accused of being an embarrassment by the 2 senators and failed the state. Well, he said to the senators from his party, he said, too bad. I'm not quitting. So it looks as if he will be in charge of the election, which should be on January the 5th. It is interesting, though, because the Republicans are reluctant to make any move to alienate Trump voters before that particular election. And that's exactly what the Democrats are trying to do as well. They're trying to keep everybody in line by not actually giving answers to really important questions, because keep in mind, if the Senate were in Democratic control, we have heard that they are going to try to get rid of the filibuster and pack the courts. Last night on our air, Joe Manchin was asked by Brett Baer whether or not he'd do either of those things, and he was straightforward. He said, absolutely not. That's not the case with Raphael Warnock, who would like to be the next senator from the great state of Georgia. He was asked about packing the court, and he said this: I think that they're trying to divide us again, and it's really sad because at the end of the day, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. That's the covenant we have with one another as an American people. And the reporter chimed in and said, but do you think Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court, would you want to see the court expanded? So they asked again. And so his answer, well, I'm really focused on representing the concerns of ordinary people here in Georgia. I think it's presumptuous for me to go further down that path without talking about what ought to happen in the courts. So he was asked twice, Brian. He will not reveal it. It's just exactly the same as Joe Biden did, although Mr. Warnock, to his credit, didn't say he was going to ask for a commission to look into it for 180 days if elected.
Right, but Senator Schumer made it pretty clear when he wanted to put his mask on and change America. That has a lot to do with getting rid of Electoral College, adding 2 states, packing the courts, and the list goes on. Senator Tom Cotton knows exactly what's at stake, especially with these 2 candidates. Listen.
If John Ossoff, a trust fund socialist, and Raphael Warnock, Jeremiah Wright's biggest supporter in Georgia, win on January 5th, and Chuck Schumer will lead the Senate, and they will, in fact, try to change America. They will pack the Supreme Court. They will make Washington, D.C. a state. They will eliminate the Electoral College. They'll give amnesty and voting rights to 15 million illegal immigrants. They'll impose Nancy Pelosi's voting law on this country. They'll take your guns. They'll raise your taxes. They will defund the police, and they will gut our military. That's the stakes of this election. That's why everyone all across America needs to support Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue in this runoff election.
I mean, the stakes couldn't be higher if the Republicans can't get it together, and both candidates are favored to win right now. If they can't get it together, get on the ground in what was once ruby red Georgia, they don't deserve those seats. So we'll see what happens. But I thought Tom Cotton laid it out perfectly.
It is so tight right now. When you take a look at all the people who are running in that primary and you add up on the Republican and Democratic side, I think they were both within, the Democrats and the Republicans, I think within 1 or 2 points. So it's going to be, once again, all about the ground game.
Right,
well,
but
which side will be able to get their side out?
But Senator Perdue was 0.2 away from 50% that would have prevented that runoff.
Well, they got rules.
And they only need 1 of 2. They only need 1 of 2 Senate seats to get the majority and prevent the changing of America and maybe demand some cooperation. Meanwhile, Jillian Mealy, fresh off her show, is set to help out this show. Hey, Jillian.
Good morning. Let's begin with a Fox News alert. A manhunt intensifying for the suspects who killed a Houston police sergeant on his way to work. Police say Sergeant Sean Rios got into a shootout near a freeway and died at a hotel trying to call for help. The police chief sending a message to his killers.
We are going to catch you. We are coming after you. We're going to capture you. So do yourself a favor and turn yourself in.
Police escorting Sergeant Rios' body overnight. The 25-year veteran leaves behind 4 children. His death comes just 3 weeks after veteran Houston Sergeant Harold Preston was killed. The FDA giving emergency use approval to Eli Lilly's COVID-19 antibody treatment. The drug helps trigger an immune response in patients with mild to moderate symptoms. It would be provided at no cost. Eli Lilly has promised to produce 300,000 vials in the coming months. It comes as the U.S. surpasses 10 million confirmed cases. More than 111,000 new cases were reported Monday. Today, Andrew McCabe is set to testify on the Russia probe. The former FBI deputy director plans to admit mistakes made by the agency in the 2016 investigation. According to prepared remarks, McCabe will also tell the Senate Judiciary Committee, quote, "We opened a case to find out how the Russians might be undermining our elections. We opened a case because it was our obligation, our duty to do so. We did our job." Jeopardy paying tribute to Alex Trebek on the first episode after his death.
He loved this show and everything it stood for. He will forever be an inspiration for his constant desire to learn, his kindness, and for his love of his family. On behalf of everyone here at Jeopardy, thank you for everything, Alex.
Look at that. Trebek died Sunday after battling pancreatic cancer. Jeopardy's producer says he spent his final hours watching the horizon with his wife Jean at their home. Trebek's final episode will air on Christmas Day. Brian, Steve?
It's going to be a different world when you turn the TV on here in New York City, as millions throughout the last 30 years have. You turn it on and there he is.
Yep.
End of an era. God rest his soul. All right. Thank you, Jillian. Well, as we discussed with our lead story, the Department of Justice now may get involved in election fraud cases. It sounds like they are, actually. Up next, we're going to hear from a former DOJ official on what this could mean from that guy. General Bill Barr yesterday instructed the Department of Justice to look into, quote, substantial allegations of voting irregularities, if such claims could potentially change the outcome of the election. This as the Trump team launches a new lawsuit in the state of Pennsylvania. Ian Pryor served as DOJ Deputy Public Affairs Director under President Trump. Joins us right now from D.C. to break it all down. Good morning to you, Ian.
Good morning.
Traditionally, the Department of Justice would not look at something like this until after the results are certified. Why do you think they're jumping the gun?
Well, you know, traditionally, it's kind of like looking at the horse after it's left the barn. I think that right now we have a spotlight on voter fraud in America, and the best time to look at it is in the present time. And, you know, for the folks that say, oh, voter fraud is a myth, I mean, that is ridiculous. Look, Lyndon Johnson won his first Senate race by stuffing the ballot box. John F. Kennedy arguably won his race by Cook County voter fraud in Illinois. And you don't even have to go back that far. Philadelphia, June 2020, they indicted a former judge for voter fraud. So this exists. It should be looked at. The question is there enough to swing an election? That's where I think you run into some trouble.
Right. And you know, there's a longstanding Department of Justice tradition where they don't do anything that might impact the outcome of an election, ultimately, either before or after.
That's true. But I think in this case, what you were looking at is serious irregularities and the possibility that voters have been either disenfranchised or that had voted illegally. And it's so important to make sure that we look into these things so that the election and the results aren't ultimately disputed going into next year and beyond.
Right. And for the most part, nearly all the top Republicans are saying the president is 100% within his rights to challenge the outcome. Challenge the outcome of Obamacare is essentially what the administration is going to do later today in court. The Supreme Court, for the third time, they're going to hear a case. How do you think this is going to shake out? Because the Democrats really made this a gigantic campaign issue.
Yeah, well, there are two issues here. First, if you remember back in 2012, John Roberts said that the individual mandate was a tax, and therefore the law was constitutional. Now, in 2017 tax reform, they got rid of the tax. Therefore, you get rid of the constitutional prerogative of the individual mandate. So that is what is being challenged. If there's no money being charged to people for not complying with the individual mandate, then that individual mandate is no longer constitutional. But then the question comes, if that's not constitutional, do you sever that from the rest of the law? And so on that front, I think you're going to have Roberts, Sotomayor, and Kagan that say, look, you can sever that unconstitutional mandate from the rest of the law. I think you're going to have Thomas and Gorsuch say, no, you can't. And then the other three that are going to be up for it are Kavanaugh and Alito, who have expressed, willingness to sever unconstitutional pieces of the law, and then Justice Barrett, who we don't really know yet. So, my prediction is that the mandate will be unconstitutional, but the law itself won't be struck down.
And even though they're hearing the case today, we're not going to know what they think for months, well into next year.
Yeah, that's right. I would think probably in June.
All right, very good. Hey, Ian, thank you very much for joining us from Washington, D.C. today. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. The DOJ says Samantha El Hassani gave that terror group more than $30,000 worth of cash and gold. She claimed she was tricked by her husband to join him in Syria, and that's why she did it. Meanwhile, Border Patrol agents have arrested 44 illegal immigrants trying to cross into the U.S. Agents busting the group after relentlessly tracking their footprints for 12 hours near Texas. CBP says the immigrants came from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. And they caught 44 of them. All right, that's some of your news, Brian.
All right, so much for the blue wave, right? As 2020 election proved to be the year of the Republican women in many respects, with a record number of GOP women newly elected to the House of Representatives. Our next guest says it is just the beginning. Here to discuss is Communications Director for Winning for Women, Olivia Perez-Cubas. Olivia, I know you hope for this type of result, but why do you think you were able to pick up so many seats?
Yeah, I mean, look, if 2018 was the year of the woman, then 2020 is the year of the Republican woman. More Republican women than ever before are going to be sitting in Congress next year, and it's not by accident. We went out and we recruited the best of the best candidates. They had the support of party leadership, the support of women like Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, and groups like Winning for Women, the one that I work for, that made sure that they had the resources that they need from start to finish to get through the finish line, and they did just that.
I think it's a lot to do with recruiting, too. I guess right now you still trail 87 to 24. Democrats have 87 females as opposed to 24 for Republicans. But you now added 13. You could have as many as 19, especially when Nicole Malliotakis is really way ahead of Max Rose. They just haven't called that yet. So do you believe that it was the Republicans were slow to pull the trigger on this big push to get women in there?
I think there's a few different reasons, but also Democrats underperformed in Congress this cycle and Republicans overperformed, and they really have Republican women to thank for that. 6 of the 8 House seats that were flipped by Republican women. It's a testament to their candidate, to the campaigns that they ran, the support that they had. But also we see so many groups from the left that claim to be champions of women. And these are the very groups that for years have been going after and targeting Republican women. And I think the Republican Party finally said enough. We went in, we made sure that they had support and resources. It worked, and the proof is in the election results.
How do you go about the recruiting of candidates, and what do you think this success will do for 2022 as you look to, I imagine, add more?
Absolutely. I think that this is just the beginning for Republican women. We look for candidates who are the strongest, who have good campaign teams, who can fundraise, who are the best fit for their districts. We don't go in and support women simply because they're women. These women are the absolute best. For example, Ashley Hinson in Iowa, who is a former TV reporter, a state representative, beat a first-term incumbent out in her state. Stephanie Bice in Oklahoma, who is the first Iranian American to ever serve in Congress. She's a woman and a Republican woman at that. And I would be remiss to not mention Senator Kelly Loeffler down in Georgia. She and Senator David Perdue are in the fight of their life right now. We've seen for many years Democrats in Congress try to pass these radical and extreme policies like Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, socialism, and at this point the only thing standing between Americans and that radical left agenda are senators down in Georgia.
And Kelly Loeffler will get the support of Doug Collins, who they were in a runoff against, and kind of split the vote vote, allowing for this now two-person runoff. And, of course, Martha McSally was not successful in Arizona, lost to the astronaut Mark Kelly. Thanks so much, Olivia Perez-Cubas. Thanks so much. We'll look to see if you get up to that number of 19, which some have projected will be there.
We feel confident.
Yeah, there's still 22 undecided races left in the House. Incredible. Very slow counting. Thanks. Meanwhile, coming up straight ahead, she spent 4 years going after the president. Now Whoopi Goldberg is telling Trump supporters to accept defeat.
All of you, suck it up. Suck it up like we sucked it up.
Thing that might impact the outcome of an election, ultimately, either before or after.
That's true. But I think in this case, what you were looking at is serious irregularities and the possibility that voters have been either disenfranchised or that had voted illegally. And it's so important to make sure that we look into these things so that the election and the results aren't ultimately disputed going into next year and beyond.
Right. And for the most part, nearly all the top Republicans are saying the president is 100% within his rights to challenge the outcome. Challenge the outcome of Obamacare is essentially what the administration is going to do later today in court. The Supreme Court, for the third time, they're going to hear a case. How do you think this is going to shake out? Because the Democrats really made this a gigantic campaign issue.
Yeah, well, there are two issues here. First, if you remember back in 2012, John Roberts said that the individual mandate was a tax, and therefore the law was constitutional. Now, in 2017 tax reform, they got rid of the tax. Therefore, you get rid of the constitutional prerogative of the individual mandate. So that is what is being challenged. If there's no money being charged to people for not complying with the individual mandate, then that individual mandate is no longer constitutional. But then the question comes, if that's not constitutional, do you sever that from the rest of the law? And so on that front, I think you're going to have Roberts, Sotomayor, and Kagan that say, look, you can sever that unconstitutional mandate from the rest of the law. I think you're going to have Thomas and Gorsuch say, no, you can't. And then the other three that are going to be up for it are Kavanaugh and Alito, who have expressed, willingness to sever unconstitutional pieces of the law, and then Justice Barrett, who we don't really know yet. So, my prediction is that the mandate will be unconstitutional, but the law itself won't be struck down.
And even though they're hearing the case today, we're not going to know what they think for months, well into next year.
Yeah, that's right. I would think probably in June.
All right, very good. Hey, Ian, thank you very much for joining us from Washington, D.C. today. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. The DOJ says Samantha El Hassani gave that terror group more than $30,000 worth of cash and gold. She claimed she was tricked by her husband to join him in Syria, and that's why she did it. Meanwhile, Border Patrol agents have arrested 44 illegal immigrants trying to cross into the U.S. Agents busting the group after relentlessly tracking their footprints for 12 hours near Texas. CBP says the immigrants came from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua.